They say a mother's love is unconditional. They say you are supposed to pour every ounce of your spirit, your sweat, and your blood into your children so they never have to know the struggles you endured. For decades, I believed that. I believed that shielding my son from the harsh realities of the world was the ultimate act of maternal devotion. At 65 years old, looking at the monster my sacrifice had created, I realized how dangerously wrong I was. My name is Sarah Vega. If you looked at me on a random Tuesday, tending to the community garden in my faded denim overalls and worn-out sneakers in South Atlanta, you would see exactly what you expected to see. An older black woman living on a fixed income, quietly passing her twilight years in the neighborhood she grew up in. You wouldn't see the millions of dollars sitting in the Vega family trust. You wouldn't see the portfolio of commercial real estate, the luxury apartment complexes, or the sprawling land developments scattered across Georgia. And that was exactly how I wanted it. My late husband David and I didn't inherit a dime. Back in the early 1980s, the banks wouldn't even look at a young black couple trying to get a mortgage in a decent neighborhood. We faced redlining, closed doors, and loan officers who smiled with their mouths but sneered with their eyes. So we did it the hard way. David worked 14-hour shifts as a heavy machinery operator, and I cleaned houses in Buckhead during the day and kept the books for small local businesses at night. Every extra dollar went into a rusted coffee tin under our bed. It took us 6 years to buy our first property, a dilapidated boarded-up duplex on Auburn Avenue. We gutted it ourselves. My hands, now lined with age and arthritis, still carry the faint scars of fiberglass insulation and splintered floorboards. We rented it out, saved the income, and bought another, then another. We built Vega properties brick by brick, overcoming every systemic barrier thrown our way. When David passed away from a sudden heart attack 12 years ago, he left behind an empire. But we had always agreed on one thing: wealth should be a tool for community building, not a megaphone for the ego. Our son, Marcus, apparently missed that lesson. At 32, Marcus was a senior architect at a prestigious midtown firm. He was undeniably brilliant, but somewhere along the way, his ambition had mutated into an ugly, suffocating arrogance. He lived in a stunning 3,000-square-foot penthouse overlooking the Atlanta skyline. He drove a customized matte black Tesla. His closet was lined with tailored Tom Ford suits. To the outside world, and especially to his 50,000 Instagram followers, Marcus was the epitome of black excellence, the self-made man who pulled himself up by his bootstraps to conquer the corporate world. He never mentioned that his entire lifestyle was a carefully curated illusion, underwritten by the mother he viewed as an embarrassment. "You have to manifest your reality, bro," Marcus would say on his social media videos, swirling a glass of aged bourbon. "No handouts, just grind." It broke my heart, but I stayed silent. When Marcus graduated and wanted to live in the city, I arranged for him to rent the penthouse, which was owned by a subsidiary of Vega Properties, for a fraction of its market value. I told him I had a connection. When he needed a car to look the part for his high-net-worth clients, I co-signed the lease through the company. I even linked a Black American Express card to the family trust for emergencies. Emergencies quickly became $2,000 dinners at Chop's Lobster Bar, spontaneous weekend trips to Cabo, and designer wardrobes for his wife, Maya. Maya was 30 years old, striking and completely oblivious. She ran a lifestyle vlog, constantly unboxing Louis Vuitton bags and showing off her luxurious soft life provided by her hard-working king. I didn't hate Maya. In fact, I pitied her. She was living in a glass house built on her husband's lies, truly believing Marcus was single-handedly funding their extravagant reality through his architecture salary. Marcus never told her about the trust. He needed her to worship him as the sole provider, the self-made titan. The tension between Marcus's fabricated world and my quiet reality had been simmering for years, but it finally boiled over on the fourth Thursday of November. Thanksgiving. I arrived at the penthouse at 2 p.m. The elevator doors opened directly into their foyer, a stark, ultra-modern space filled with cold marble and abstract metal sculptures that looked more like weapons than art. I carried 3 heavy aluminum catering pans, my signature baked mac and cheese, collard greens slow-cooked with smoked turkey, and a peach cobbler made from David's mother's recipe. "Oh, you brought food," Maya said, greeting me at the door. She was wearing a silk slip dress that cost more than my first car. She looked at the foil-covered pans with a tight, strained smile. Marcus hired a private chef this year, Mama Sarah. We're doing a modern fusion menu, truffle-infused mashed potatoes and a Wagyu beef roast. There's always room for a little tradition, baby, I said gently, carrying the heavy pans toward the gleaming, untouched kitchen. Marcus stepped out of the hallway, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored shirt. He looked at me, his eyes quickly scanning my modest burgundy sweater and simple black slacks. I could see the familiar flash of irritation in his gaze. I didn't fit his aesthetic. "Mom, can you put those in the back fridge?" he asked, his tone clipped, corporate. "My partners from the firm are coming, and a few developers from Midtown. I really need tonight to be seamless. No drama, okay?" "When have I ever brought drama, Marcus?" I asked, wiping my hands on a dish towel. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Just try to mingle, but maybe steer clear of the real estate talk. These guys operate on a different level. I don't want them getting bogged down in stories about the good old days in South Atlanta." He was ashamed of me. The realization wasn't new, but it stung sharper that day. He was ashamed of the hands that had scrubbed toilets to pay for his private tutoring. He was embarrassed by the woman who owned the very floor he was standing on. By 7 p.m., the penthouse was buzzing with 25 guests. The air was thick with the smell of expensive cologne, the clinking of crystal champagne flutes, and the hollow sound of networking disguised as friendship. I sat quietly near the edge of the sprawling dining table, listening to men in expensive watches congratulate themselves on their successes. Marcus was in his element, holding court at the head of the table. "It's about vision," Marcus was telling a wealthy developer seated to his right. "When I started my career, I promised myself I'd never settle for mediocrity. You look at where I came from. My parents did their best, you know? But they lacked the mindset. They played it safe, stayed small. You have to be willing to elevate. I stared at my plate, played it safe, stayed small. David and I had risked everything we had, leveraging our entire lives so Marcus could go to Howard University debt-free." "Well, you've certainly elevated, Marcus," a partner's wife laughed, gesturing around the opulent room. "This place is incredible. The rent must be astronomical." Marcus smirked, swirling his wine. "It's not about the cost. It's about what you think you deserve. If you want a top-tier life, you earn it. You don't wait for handouts." Maya beamed at him, resting her manicured hand on his arm. "He works so hard," she cooed. I reached for my water glass. My hands were trembling, not from age, but from a deep, seismic grief. I was mourning the boy I had raised, watching him be consumed by the man he had chosen to become. As I set the glass down, my sleeve caught the edge of the gravy boat the private chef had placed nearby. It tipped. A dark, rich pool of brown gravy spilled onto the pristine, custom-made white linen tablecloth. The conversation around the table stuttered to a halt. 25 pairs of eyes turned to look at the expanding stain. "Oh, for God's sake!" Marcus hissed. It wasn't a loud shout. It was a harsh, venomous whisper that carried perfectly in the suddenly silent room. "I'm sorry," I said, immediately grabbing my cloth napkin to dab at the spill. "It was an accident. I'll pay for the cleaning." "Don't touch it! You're making it worse!" Marcus snapped, standing up abruptly. His chair scraped aggressively against the hardwood floor. "Maya, get the chef to handle this." "Marcus, please, it's just a little gravy," Maya whispered, sensing the sudden uncomfortable shift in the room's energy. But Marcus was done performing. The mask slipped, revealing the ugly, entitled core he had been nurturing for years. He looked down at me, not as a son looking at his mother, but as a landlord looking at a nuisance. "This is exactly what I was talking about," Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You don't respect nice things because you don't know what it takes to acquire them. You come into my home—" "Your home?" I interrupted, my voice low but steady. "Yes, my home," he fired back, his chest puffing out. He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer, pulled out a sleek leather wallet, and extracted his checkbook. He hastily scribbled on it, tore the check free, and tossed it onto the table. It landed directly in the spilled gravy. $500, Marcus said, looking down his nose at me. "Since you clearly don't understand the value of this environment, maybe it's time you start contributing. If you want to sit at this table, Mom, pay the rent like a normal person. Otherwise, take your Tupperware and go back to the hood where you belong." Dead silence. No one breathed. The developer looked away. Maya's eyes were wide with shock, her mouth slightly open. "Marcus," she whispered, horrified. But no one defended me. In a room full of powerful, wealthy people, I was invisible. I was just the embarrassing old woman who didn't belong. I looked at the check, soaking up the brown liquid. I looked at the imported crystal, the Wagyu beef, the stunning skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Then I looked at my son. His jaw was set, his eyes hard and unyielding. He was waiting for me to cry. He was waiting for me to apologize and shrink back into the shadows, allowing him to reclaim his throne. Instead, I felt a strange, profound sense of calm wash over me. The invisible chains of maternal guilt, the ones that had bound me to his financial irresponsibility for years, simply snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't throw a drink in his face. I calmly folded my stained napkin and placed it next to my plate. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my burgundy sweater. I looked Marcus dead in the eyes, stripping away decades of unconditional love until there was nothing left but the cold, calculating gaze of a businesswoman. "You're right, Marcus," I said. My voice didn't waver. It resonated with a quiet, terrifying authority that made him blink in confusion. "It is time we stop living in the past. It is time we recognize the true value of this environment." I didn't say goodbye to Maya. I didn't acknowledge his guests. I turned around, my head held high, and walked out of the dining room. As I waited for the private elevator, I could hear the awkward, hushed murmurs starting back up in the penthouse. I heard Marcus laugh, a forced, nervous sound. "You know how it is," he was saying to his friends. "Generational differences." The elevator doors closed, cutting off his voice. As the car descended 30 floors to the lobby, I pulled my cell phone from my purse. It was 8:30 p.m. on Thanksgiving night. I scrolled through my contacts and pressed the name of my lead corporate attorney. He answered on the second ring. "Happy Thanksgiving, Sarah. Everything all right?" "Happy Thanksgiving, Robert," I said, stepping out into the cool, crisp Atlanta night air. "I'm sorry to bother you on a holiday, but I need you to draw up some paperwork first thing tomorrow morning." "Of course. What do you need?" I looked back up at the towering glass building, finding the illuminated windows of the penthouse near the top. "I need an eviction notice," I said, my voice steady. "And I need you to cancel the American Express card ending in 4108. Send the repossession order for the Tesla, too." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Robert had known about Marcus's setup for years. "Are you absolutely sure, Sarah?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied. "My son wants to be a self-made man. It's time I let him." The morning after Thanksgiving, the penthouse smelled of stale champagne, expensive truffle oil, and the lingering metallic scent of regret. Marcus woke up at 9 a.m. with a dull throbbing behind his temples. He rolled over in the California king bed, the 800 thread count Egyptian cotton sheets tangled around his legs. Maya was already awake, sitting at the edge of the mattress in her silk robe, furiously tapping at her glowing iPhone screen. Her brow was deeply furrowed. "Marcus," she said, not looking up, "did you freeze the Amex?" Marcus rubbed his face, groaning as the harsh morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "What? No. Why would I freeze the card?" "Because I just tried to pay the caterer the remaining balance for last night, and it declined," Maya said, her voice tight with rising panic. "Then I tried to buy my Pilates membership for the month. Declined. It says the account has been suspended." Marcus sat up, the fog of the hangover instantly lifting, replaced by a sharp prickle of annoyance. "It's probably just a fraud alert. We had 25 people here last night, and you were swiping it for last-minute floral arrangements and premium liquor. The algorithm probably flagged it. I'll call them when I get to the office." He threw off the covers and walked toward the master bathroom, determined to wash off the night's exhaustion. He didn't want to think about the party. More specifically, he didn't want to think about his mother. The memory of her quiet, chilling exit the night before sat heavy in his stomach like a swallowed stone. It is time we recognize the true value of this environment. What the hell was that supposed to mean? It was just dramatic, emotional manipulation. Typical Sarah. As he turned on the rainfall shower, his phone buzzed on the marble vanity. An email notification illuminated the screen. Sender Vega Trust Administration and Legal Counsel. Subject urgent. Notice of lease termination and asset reclamation. Marcus frowned. He wiped a drop of water from the screen and opened the email. Dear Mr. Vega, this formal communication serves as your 30-day notice to vacate the premises located at... His eyes skimmed the block of legal jargon. his brain refusing to process the words. Vacate. Termination of tenancy. Revocation of vehicle authorization. This is insane, Marcus muttered aloud. He stepped out of the bathroom, a towel hastily wrapped around his waist. He marched back into the bedroom, his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs. Maya, did you piss off the building management? Did the party get too loud? No, Maya said, looking up, her face pale. Why? Because I just got an eviction notice, Marcus snapped, staring at the phone. And something about my car. It has to be a clerical error. I'm going down to the garage. I'm going to drive over to the leasing office and sort this out right now. Marcus threw on a pair of designer sweatpants and a fitted hoodie, grabbed his keys, and took the private elevator down to the secure underground parking garage. As the metal doors slid open, he stopped dead in his tracks. His matte black Tesla Model S, the car he had meticulously customized, the car he posed in front of for half of his Instagram posts, was hooked up to the back of a heavy-duty flatbed tow truck. A burly man in a high-visibility vest was securing the rear wheels with thick yellow straps. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Marcus shouted, sprinting across the concrete floor. Drop the car, that's my vehicle. The tow truck driver didn't even flinch. He calmly finished tightening the strap, then pulled a clipboard from his belt. You Marcus Vega? Yes, I'm Marcus Vega, and I'm calling the police if you don't unhook my car right now. The driver handed him a thick stack of stapled papers. Call whoever you want, buddy. I got a legal repossession order right here. Title owner requested an immediate reclamation of the asset. Keys, please. I am the owner, Marcus roared, snatching the papers from the man's hand. He looked down at the highlighted section of the document. The bold print stared back at him, mocking his outrage. Registered owner. The Vega Family Trust. Authorized user. Revoked. Marcus Vega. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. The concrete floor beneath his expensive sneakers suddenly felt like it was tilting. The Vega Family Trust. It was a name he recognized vaguely, the corporate entity he signed his impossibly cheap lease with 3 years ago. He had always assumed it was just a subsidiary of some massive real estate conglomerate his architecture firm did business with. A professional courtesy. A perk of being a high-level executive. Keys, the driver repeated, holding out a calloused hand. Or I call the cops and we add a scene to your morning. Numbly, Marcus reached into his pocket and handed over the heavy black key fob. He stood frozen in the damp, echoing garage, watching as the tow truck pulled away, taking his pride and joy up the ramp and out into the Atlanta daylight. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through his ego. He needed to fix this. He called an Uber, his hands shaking so badly he dropped his phone twice. He typed in the address listed at the top of the repossession order and the eviction email. 20 minutes later, the Uber dropped him off in front of a sleek, glass-fronted corporate building in the heart of Buckhead. He marched through the revolving doors, his jaw set in a hard line. He was Marcus Vega, a senior architect. He was not someone you could just tow and evict on a Friday morning without consequences. He approached the reception desk on the 14th floor. The brass lettering behind the receptionist read, Torres and Vance Legal Associates, Estate and Trust Management. I need to speak to whoever is in charge of the Vega Family Trust, Marcus demanded, leaning over the marble counter. My name is Marcus Vega. There has been a massive illegal mistake with my accounts and my residence. The receptionist didn't look flustered. She typed something into her computer, picked up a phone, and whispered a few words. Mr. Torres will see you now, Mr. Vega. Last door on the right. Marcus stormed down the plush carpeted hallway and threw open the heavy oak door. Sitting behind a massive mahogany desk was Robert Torres, a silver-haired attorney in a bespoke suit. Robert had a file folder open in front of him. He did not stand up. He did not offer his hand. Take a seat, Marcus, Robert said calmly. I don't want to sit, Marcus barked, slamming his palms on the desk. I want my car back. I want my Amex unfrozen. And I want that ridiculous eviction notice rescinded before I sue this entire management company into the ground. Robert sighed, a deeply tired sound. He took off his reading glasses and looked up at Marcus with a mixture of pity and profound disgust. You can't sue us, Marcus, because we are simply executing the explicit legal directives of our client. Robert tapped the thick manila folder on his desk. The sole trustee and president of the Vega Family Trust. Then let me talk to the president, Marcus yelled. Who the hell is running this trust? Robert slowly turned the folder around and slid it across the polished wood toward Marcus. "Open it." Marcus glared at him, then snatched the folder. He flipped it open. On top was the master deed to the penthouse. Below it was the title to the Tesla. Below that, the primary account documentation for the American Express Black Card. And there, printed in stark, undeniable black ink across every single legal document, was a name. Primary account holder and trust. President, Sarah Vega. The silence in the office was deafening. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed against Marcus's eardrums until they rang. His eyes darted across the page, reading the name over and over again, waiting for the letters to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Sarah Vega, his mother, the woman who wore faded overalls, the woman who clipped coupons, the woman he had thrown a $500 check at last night, telling her to go back to the hood. "This is a joke," Marcus whispered, all the air rushing out of his lungs. His legs suddenly gave out, and he collapsed heavily into the leather guest chair. "This is some kind of sick joke. My mother is a retired bookkeeper. She lives in a 2-bedroom house in South Atlanta." "Your mother," Robert said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding register, "is a real estate titan. She and your father built an empire while you were still learning to ride a bicycle. They bought up red-lined properties, renovated them, and held on to them while the city gentrified. She owns the building you live in, Marcus. She owns the car you drive. She has been quietly paying for your entire self-made lifestyle for 3 years because she loved you enough to want you to feel successful." Robert leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "And last night you humiliated her in her own building. You told her to pay rent. So she is granting your wish. You are now being treated exactly like any other tenant who has overstayed their welcome. The subsidies are over." A wave of cognitive dissonance so violent it caused physical nausea washed over Marcus. Everything he believed about himself, his superiority, his grind, his narrative of black excellence, was a manufactured lie. He was nothing but a trust fund baby playing dress-up, and he had just bitten the only hand that had ever fed him. I have to call her," Marcus stammered, pulling out his phone. "She won't answer," Robert said coldly. "Any further communication regarding your living situation will go through this office. You have 29 days to vacate the premises, Marcus. I suggest you start packing. The Atlanta rental market is brutal this time of year." The Uber ride back to the penthouse felt like a funeral procession. Marcus stared out the window, the glittering high-rises of Midtown suddenly looking like jagged teeth ready to chew him up. When he walked back into the penthouse, the sprawling luxury of the space no longer felt like a castle. It felt like a museum exhibit he was no longer allowed to touch. It was a glass cage. Maya was pacing the living room, a half-packed Louis Vuitton duffel bag on the sofa. "Where is the car? I tried to call an Uber, but the account is linked to the Amex and it won't go through. Marcus, what is going on? I called my sister and she said her husband heard a rumor from the building concierge that we're being evicted." Marcus looked at his wife. He looked at her perfectly styled hair, her expensive clothes, the expectation of luxury written into every line of her beautiful face. If he told her the truth, that he was a fraud, that his mother owned them both, she would lose all respect for him. The fragile male ego, bruised and bleeding, went into immediate defense mode. "It's my mother," Marcus lied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "She lost her mind last night. You saw how she acted. She has some connections with the property developers. She made some calls, pulled some strings, and sabotaged my lease. She froze the accounts out of spite." Maya stopped pacing. "What? How could she possibly have the power to do that?" "I don't know," Marcus yelled, playing the cornered victim perfectly. "She's vindictive, Maya. She's always hated that I made it out and she didn't. She's trying to ruin me because I stood up to her last night." Maya looked at him, her eyes wide, searching his face. For a moment she looked like she wanted to believe him. She nodded slowly. Okay, babe. We'll fight this. We have your salary. We'll get a lawyer. We'll move somewhere better." Marcus pulled her into a hug, closing his eyes tightly against the overwhelming guilt. My salary. His take-home pay was barely enough to cover the maintenance fees of a building like this, let alone the rent, the lifestyle, and Maya's spending habits. But he couldn't tell her that. Not yet. He just needed time to figure it out. He didn't get time. 3 days later, Marcus returned home from the architecture firm. He was exhausted. He had spent the entire day trying to secure a personal loan, only to realize his debt-to-income ratio was completely skewed without the trust artificially backing his credit. He opened the door to the penthouse, expecting the usual smell of expensive candles and the sound of Maya's vlog recording in the background. Instead, the apartment was deathly quiet. There were 4 large designer suitcases sitting perfectly aligned by the front door. "Maya?" Marcus called out, a spike of dread hitting his chest. She walked out of the master bedroom. She wasn't wearing her usual glamorous loungewear. She wore simple jeans, a plain sweater, and a trench coat. Her face was completely devoid of makeup, and her eyes were red-rimmed, hard as polished stones. In her hand, she held a thick manila folder. It looked identical to the one Robert Torres had slid across the desk. "You left your briefcase unlocked in the study," Maya said. Her voice didn't shake. It was eerily, terrifyingly calm. Marcus froze. "Maya, don't— I found the eviction notice. I found the title to the car. And I found the Amex statements." Maya walked slowly toward him, stopping a few feet away. She threw the folder onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a heavy, damning slap. "Sarah Vega, president of the Vega Family Trust." Marcus swallowed hard. "I can explain. I was going to tell you—" "You were going to tell me what?" Maya interrupted, her voice finally cracking, a surge of raw, agonizing betrayal bleeding through. "That my entire marriage is a lie? That every time I went online and bragged about my hard-working king, I was actually flexing money that belonged to a 65-year-old black woman who wears overalls and scrubs her own floors?" "Maya, I did it for us," Marcus pleaded, reaching for her. "I wanted to give you the world." Maya stepped back, batting his hand away as if it were on fire. "Don't you dare put this on me. You didn't do this for me, Marcus. You did this for your ego. You let me treat your mother like she was the help. You let me look down on her, while she was literally paying for the roof over my head." Tears finally spilled over Maya's eyelashes, but they were tears of profound shame. "Do you know how sick that makes me feel? I was an accomplice to your abuse, Marcus. You used me to perform this fake plastic wealth, and you used your mother to fund it. And then, when she finally had enough, you looked me in the eye and told me she was the vindictive one. Maya, please, I love you. We can start over. I have my job." "I don't care about the money, Marcus," Maya said, her voice dropping to a whisper that echoed loudly in the empty, cavernous room. "If you had come to me on day 1 and said, 'I make a normal salary, let's build a normal life,' I would have held your hand and built it with you. I am not leaving you because you are broke." She picked up her purse and walked toward the 4 suitcases by the door. She grabbed the handles of 2 of them, looking back at him one last time. "I'm leaving you because you are a coward. And I refuse to be married to a man who builds his throne on his mother's back." The heavy oak door clicked shut behind her. Marcus stood alone in the center of the 3,000-square-foot penthouse. The sun was setting over the Atlanta skyline, casting long, dark shadows across the marble floors. For the first time in his life, the silence of the room wasn't peaceful. It was a prison sentence. He was completely, utterly alone, and he had no one to blame but himself. Here is part 3 of the story, continuing the slow burn emotional journey as Marcus faces the harsh reality of his new life. The descent was not a sudden drop. It was a slow, agonizing slide down a jagged cliff face. For the first 2 weeks after Maya left, Marcus tried to maintain the illusion. He moved into an extended-stay business hotel in Midtown, paying exorbitant nightly rates on a high-interest credit card he had managed to secure before his credit score updated. He told his colleagues that his penthouse was undergoing emergency plumbing renovations. He wore his tailored Tom Ford suits, though they began to hang loosely on his frame as stress killed his appetite. But a lie that massive requires an immense amount of energy to sustain, and Marcus was running on fumes. The final blow to his professional facade came on a Tuesday afternoon during a pitch to a major commercial developer. Marcus was the lead architect on the project, a sleek, multi-use high-rise. 6 months ago, he would have owned the room, charming the investors with his usual blend of arrogance and charisma. But today, his hands shook as he held the laser pointer. His mind kept drifting to his dwindling bank account, to Maya's packed suitcases, to the silence from his mother. When the lead investor asked a standard question about load-bearing variances, Marcus froze. He stammered, shuffling through his notes, the silence in the boardroom stretching into a suffocating eternity. The next morning, the senior partners called him into the glass-walled corner office. "We lost the account, Marcus," the managing partner said, leaning back in his leather chair. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, which was worse. "Word is getting around. You missed 3 client dinners last week. Your designs for the Buckhead project lack your usual edge. You look like a ghost." "I've just been dealing with some personal issues," Marcus protested, his voice tight. "A minor bump. I just need a few days." "We are putting you on an indefinite, unpaid leave of absence," the partner interrupted softly. "You've lost your focus, Marcus. And in this tier of architecture, if you aren't focused, you are a liability. Take some time. Get your head straight." It wasn't a firing on paper, but in the cutthroat world of high-end corporate architecture, it was a death sentence. He was out. With no income and his credit cards maxed out, the Midtown Hotel was no longer an option. Marcus had to pack his 3 remaining suitcases and take the MARTA train south. He rode the train past the glittering skyscrapers he used to design, watching the city skyline shrink until it was replaced by the low-slung, faded brick buildings of South Atlanta. He rented a cramped 1-bedroom apartment in a complex that had seen better days in the 1990s. The rent was $950 a month. The walls were painted a sickly, institutional beige, and the carpet smelled faintly of old cigarettes and bleach. There was no concierge. There was no underground parking. There was just a rattling window, AC unit that fought a losing battle against the oppressive Georgia humidity. Marcus spent his first night sitting on a cheap second-hand mattress on the floor, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. He pulled out his phone. He had 0 new messages. His friends, the developers, the socialites, the people who drank his expensive champagne at Thanksgiving, had vanished the moment the penthouse did. Maya's number went straight to voicemail. He opened his banking app, the app. Available balance, $142.18. He squeezed his eyes shut, a raw, ugly sob tearing from his throat. He cried for the life he had lost, for the wife who had walked away, and finally, beneath the layers of his shattered ego, he cried because he knew he deserved it. By the end of the second week in South Atlanta, hunger replaced pride. Marcus needed cash. He couldn't apply to other high-end firms. His reputation in Midtown was currently radioactive, and without a verifiable address or his previous portfolio files, he was a ghost. He walked down the sweltering pavement of a neighborhood undergoing early-stage, aggressive gentrification. Modest, historic black homes were being gutted to make way for sterile, boxy modern builds. He stopped in front of a residential construction site. The skeleton of a house stood exposed to the sun. Men in hard hats and dust-covered jeans were hauling lumber and mixing concrete. Marcus walked onto the dirt lot, wearing a pair of old jeans and a plain t-shirt. He approached a man who was barking orders from the bed of a battered Ford pickup truck. He was an older black man, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard heavily salted with gray, and a hard, unyielding stare. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice lacking its usual commanding corporate timbre. "Are you the foreman?" The older man looked Marcus up and down, taking in his soft hands, his clean boots, and the defeated slump of his shoulders. "I'm Ray. What do you want?" "I need a job. I'm a hard worker. I learn fast." Ray let out a low, rumbling laugh. "You look like you've never held a hammer in your life, son. This ain't a gym. We build houses. It breaks your back. Go find a desk." "I don't want a desk," Marcus said, stepping closer. The desperation in his chest made him bold. "I need cash. I'll sweep floors. I'll haul trash. Pay me minimum wage under the table. I won't quit." Ray stared at him for a long, uncomfortable moment. His dark eyes seemed to look right through Marcus, calculating something. Finally, Ray spat a sunflower seed onto the dirt. "Show up tomorrow at 5:30 a.m. You're late by 1 minute, you're fired. You complain about the heat, you're fired. Grab a broom and start clearing the drywall debris in the master suite." That was how Marcus Vega, former senior architect of Midtown Atlanta, became a general laborer. The first month was a physical crucible. Marcus's body, accustomed to ergonomic office chairs and air-conditioned luxury, rebelled violently against the labor. His soft, manicured hands blistered, popped, and formed thick, yellow calluses. His lower back screamed in agony every morning when he dragged himself off the floor mattress. He spent his days breathing in sawdust, hauling 80-pound bags of cement, and baking under the relentless southern sun. But as his body broke down, something strange happened to his mind. The noise stopped. The obsessive anxiety about his Instagram image, the desperate need to look richer than the man next to him, the hollow networking. It all evaporated in the heat of the work site. There was no room for ego when you were covered in drywall dust. He worked alongside men who had entirely different definitions of struggle. There was Dante, a 19-year-old trying to pay for community college so his little sister wouldn't have to work. There was Javier, who sent every spare dime back to his family in Honduras. These men didn't care about Marcus's past. They only cared if he could hold his end of a steel beam. One sweltering Thursday afternoon, Ray tasked Marcus with organizing the blueprint copies in the makeshift site office, a humid metal shipping container. Marcus unrolled the blueprints for the next phase of the project. A low-income housing complex the city had contracted them to build 2 miles down the road. As his eyes scanned the blue lines and white text, the architect inside him woke up from its long, depressed slumber. He frowned. He traced a line along the load-bearing framework of the second-story units. The design was legal, meeting the bare minimum of the city codes, but it was incredibly cheap. The structural integrity was compromised to save on lumber costs. If a severe Georgia storm hit, or over 10 years of settling, those floors would warp. The families living there, families like Dante's, would be dealing with cracked foundations and unsafe conditions. It was the exact kind of corner-cutting Marcus used to approve when he was designing for wealthy developers who wanted to maximize profit margins on affordable units. A sharp pang of disgust hit him. Disgust at the industry and disgust at himself. Marcus didn't go home when the whistle blew at 6 p.m. He stayed in the stifling shipping container. He found a pencil, a straight edge, and a blank roll of drafting paper. Under the flickering light of a single bulb, he went to work. He didn't design for aesthetic glory. He designed for safety, for longevity, for dignity. He mathematically reconfigured the weight distribution, utilizing a truss system that required slightly more labor, but the exact same amount of raw materials, increasing the structural strength by 40%. It was past midnight when the heavy metal door of the container creaked open. Ray stood in the doorway, a flashlight in his hand. He looked at Marcus, covered in sweat, leaning over the drafting table. "What the hell are you doing, boy?" Ray grumbled, stepping inside. "I don't pay overtime for sitting in the dark." "Look at this," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. He didn't cower. For the first time in months, he felt entirely confident. He slid the new blueprints across the table. Ray picked up the paper, shining his flashlight over the intricate, perfectly drawn lines. He was a veteran builder. He knew how to read a schematic. He was quiet for a long time, his eyes tracing the math Marcus had scribbled in the margins. "The original framing plan is garbage, Ray," Marcus said softly. "It's a minimum compliance death trap waiting to happen 10 years down the line. If we use this truss system instead, we redistribute the load. It takes the crew an extra day of framing per unit, but the materials cost exactly the same, and the building will stand for 50 years instead of 15. Ray looked up from the paper. He didn't look angry. He looked intensely studying. "You drew this up in 6 hours?" Ray asked. "I'm an architect," Marcus said. It was the first time he had spoken the words out loud since his firing, and this time there was no arrogance attached to the title, only truth. "Or I used to be." Ray rolled up the paper slowly. He tapped it against his thigh. "Be here at 5 a.m. tomorrow. We're showing this to the site manager. If he approves the labor variance, you're off trash duty. You're my new site planner." Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. It wasn't a promotion to a corner office. It was a slight bump in pay and a title on a dusty construction site. But it felt better, purer, than any multi-million-dollar commission he had ever landed in Midtown. "Thank you, Ray," Marcus whispered. Ray just grunted, turning around to leave the container. "Don't thank me. Just don't make me look stupid for trusting you." An hour later, Ray sat in the cab of his beat-up Ford pickup truck, parked under a flickering street lamp outside the construction site. The engine was idling, the AC blasting cold air. He pulled a scuffed smartphone from his breast pocket, dialed a number from his favorites list, and put it on speaker. It rang twice before a woman answered. Her voice was calm, refined, and wide awake despite the late hour. "Hello, Ray," Sarah Vega Saadi said. "Evening, Sarah," Ray replied, resting his thick arm on the steering wheel. He glanced back at the metal shipping container where the single light bulb had finally been turned off. "Just calling to give you the weekly report." "How is he?" Sarah asked. The cool business facade dropped slightly, revealing the soft, anxious undercurrent of a mother. His hands look like raw meat and he's dropped about 15 pounds, Ray said honestly. The first 2 weeks I thought he was going to walk. He had that snotty, rich kid look in his eye every time I told him to pick up a broom. Sarah sighed softly on the other end of the line. But he didn't walk, Ray smiled, a genuine wide grin in the dark cab of his truck. He took the beating. And tonight he stayed late. Looked at the blueprints for the South Side housing project. He found the structural flaws the city planners ignored. He redrew the whole framing system, Sarah. Made it safe. Didn't ask for a dime, didn't ask for credit. Just wanted it built right. Silence hung on the line for a moment. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was thick with suppressed emotion. He's remembering why he loved building in the first place, she whispered. He's waking up, Sarah, Ray agreed. He reached over to the passenger seat and picked up an old, framed photograph he kept in the truck. It showed 2 young black men in the 1980s wearing hard hats, covered in dust, smiling proudly in front of a half-finished brick wall. One was a much younger Ray. The other was David Vega, Marcus's father. He's got David's eye for structure, Ray said softly, looking at his old friend in the photo. And he's finally getting your spine. You were right to send him to me. Don't go easy on him, Ray, Sarah said, her voice finding its iron resolve once again. He still has a long way to go to pay for his arrogance. Keep pushing him. The fire has to burn all the impurities out. Don't worry about that, boss lady, Ray chuckled, putting the truck into gear. Tomorrow, I'm making him haul the concrete blocks for the new foundation himself. He's going to earn every inch of his soul back. Ray hung up the phone and drove off into the Atlanta night, leaving Marcus asleep on his floor mattress miles away, completely unaware that his rock bottom was actually the foundation his mother had secretly laid for his salvation. Autumn bled into a bitter, damp Atlanta winter. For 8 months, Marcus Vega did not step foot inside a fine dining restaurant. He did not buy a single article of clothing that didn't come from a Goodwill rack. He woke up at 4:30 a.m. in a freezing apartment, took a lukewarm shower, and spent 12 hours a day on a construction site where the wind whipped brutally through the unfinished framing. He was no longer the soft, manicured architect of Midtown. He was lean, hardened by manual labor, his skin weathered and his hands permanently stained with calluses and dried mortar. But inside his cramped shipping container office, under the glow of a cheap desk lamp, his mind had never been sharper. Over those 8 months, Marcus had poured every ounce of his leftover energy into a singular vision. He called it the Haven Project. It was a comprehensive blueprint for a high-density, low-income housing community. But unlike the sterile concrete blocks the city usually commissioned, Haven was designed with dignity. Marcus used his intimate knowledge of high-end architectural geometry to create modular interlocking units that maximized natural light and cross-ventilation. He designed communal green spaces, safe walkways for children, and utilized durable, cost-effective materials he had learned to manipulate by working with them firsthand. It was a masterpiece of social architecture. It could house 200 families for the same budget the city was currently spending to house 80. One freezing Friday evening in February, Marcus was rolling up the final master schematic when Ray walked into the container. The old foreman didn't say a word. He just walked over to the drafting table, unrolled the thick stack of papers, and studied them for a long time. "This is it?" Ray finally asked, his gruff voice quiet. "Every beam, every pipe, every dollar accounted for," Marcus said, wiping a smudge of graphite from his cheek. "It cuts the city's standard material waste by 20%. The units are soundproofed, energy efficient, and actually look like homes, not prisons." Ray traced a thick, calloused finger over the elevation drawings. "It's too good to sit in a rusty shipping container, Marcus." "I know," Marcus sighed, leaning back against a stack of drywall. "But nobody is going to fund a multi-million-dollar community project pitched by a disgraced architect working as a day laborer. I don't have the network anymore. I don't have the backing." Ray pulled a crumpled, embossed business card from his heavy canvas jacket and tossed it onto the blueprints. "Georgia Community Investment Coalition," Marcus read aloud, frowning at the gold lettering. "The GCIC. Ray, they are the biggest philanthropic development fund in the state. They don't take walk-ins." "I know a guy who knows a guy," Ray said evasively, refusing to meet Marcus's eyes. "I got you a meeting. Next Wednesday. 10 a.m. Board of Directors. You have 20 minutes to pitch this, or they throw you out. Don't embarrass me." Before Marcus could even formulate a sentence of gratitude, Ray turned and walked out into the cold night. Wednesday morning arrived with a biting frost. Marcus stood in front of the cracked mirror in his small bathroom, adjusting the collar of his suit. It wasn't Tom Ford. It was a dark navy suit he had found at a thrift store in East Point for $35. The sleeves were a fraction of an inch too short, and the fabric was slightly stiff, but he had spent hours ironing it to perfection. He polished his only pair of dress shoes until they gleamed. He didn't look like a millionaire anymore, but looking into his own eyes, for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a fraud. He rode the MARTA train to the financial district. As he stepped off the train and walked among the towering glass and steel skyscrapers, he felt a strange sense of detachment. He used to rule these sidewalks. He used to look at the people in cheap suits with veiled pity. Now he was one of them, carrying a battered leather portfolio that held the hopes of families he actually knew by name. The GCIC headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a massive corporate tower. Marcus checked in at the security desk and rode the silent high-speed elevator to the 40th floor. The doors opened to a sprawling lobby of polished marble, lush indoor greenery, and quiet, intimidating wealth. A receptionist in a sharp suit led him down a long hallway flanked by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "They are waiting for you in the main boardroom, Mr. Vega. You have 20 minutes. She pushed open the heavy, double mahogany doors. Marcus stepped into the room. It was cavernous, dominated by a massive oval table made of dark walnut. Seated around the table were 8 men and women in immaculate business attire, bankers, community leaders, and heavy-hitting philanthropists. Marcus walked toward the presentation podium, unzipping his portfolio. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady. "My name is Marcus Vega, and I am here to present—" He looked up, his breath caught violently in his throat. His hands, which had been so steady all morning, suddenly gripped the edges of the wooden podium so hard his knuckles turned white. Sitting at the absolute head of the oval table, directly in his line of sight, was the chairwoman of the board. She wore a tailored, charcoal gray blazer over a crisp white blouse. Her silver hair was pulled back into an elegant, severe chignon. Her posture was flawless, radiating a quiet, absolute authority that dominated the room. It was Sarah Vega. The room seemed to tilt. A roaring sound filled Marcus's ears. His mother, the woman he had told to go back to the hood. The woman who had evicted him, stripped him of his wealth, and banished him to the dirt. She wasn't just a real estate investor. She was the head of the largest philanthropic fund in Georgia. "She orchestrated this," a voice screamed in his head. "Ray works for her. She set this up to humiliate me, to watch me beg." For 5 agonizing seconds, Marcus stood frozen. The instinct to run, to grab his portfolio and flee the building to protect what little pride he had left, was overwhelming. He felt the familiar hot sting of ego rising in his chest. But then, he looked away from his mother and looked down at his blueprints. He didn't see lines on paper. He saw Dante, studying by the light of a street lamp because his apartment couldn't afford electricity. He saw Javier sending money home while living in a mold-infested basement. If he walked out that door now to protect his own pride, he was abandoning them. Marcus took a deep, shuddering breath. He forced his ego down, burying it deep in the dirt where he had spent the last 8 months. He looked back up, meeting his mother's icy, impassive gaze. He didn't flinch. "My name is Marcus Vega," he repeated, his voice ringing out with a newfound resonant power. "And I am here to present the Haven Project." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus delivered the presentation of his life. He didn't use corporate buzzwords. He didn't talk about synergy or profit margins or brand elevation. He talked about human dignity. He unrolled his blueprints and walked the board through the exact mathematics of cost-saving structural trusses. He explained the psychological benefits of natural light in high-density populations. "For too long, affordable housing in Atlanta has been designed as a punishment for being poor," Marcus said, looking around the table, making eye contact with every board member. "We build concrete boxes that look like penitentiaries because it's cheap, but Haven proves that dignity does not have to break the budget. With my structural redesigns, we can build homes that foster community, reduce crime, and stand for half a century, all within your standard allocation metrics." When he finished, the room was silent. Several board members were nodding slowly, clearly impressed by the depth of his technical knowledge and the raw, undeniable passion in his delivery. Sarah Vega leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. Her face was completely unreadable. "An impressive presentation, Mr. Vega," said a man seated to Sarah's right. His nameplate read Richard Sterling, VP of Risk Assessment. "The math is undeniably solid, the design is beautiful, but a project of this magnitude, a $20 million grant, requires us to invest in the architect as much as the architecture." Richard opened a sleek tablet in front of him. "And frankly, Mr. Vega, your professional history is deeply concerning." Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "I have your file here," Richard continued, his tone turning surgical. "You were a senior architect at Vanguard Architecture in Midtown, until 8 months ago, when you were placed on an indefinite, unpaid leave for negligence, missing client meetings, and delivering subpar work. You lived a highly publicized, extravagant lifestyle that abruptly collapsed. You went bankrupt. You are currently working as a day laborer in South Atlanta." Richard looked up, his eyes narrowing. "You want us to hand $20 million to a man who couldn't even manage his own life, let alone a massive community development? Why should we trust you?" The boardroom grew incredibly tense. Marcus gripped the podium. He had known this was coming. He couldn't hide his past. "You are right to be concerned, Mr. Sterling," Marcus said, keeping his voice even. 8 months ago, I was arrogant, distracted, and negligent. I chased status instead of substance. I lost everything because I deserved to lose it." He looked around the table. "But the man who made those mistakes died in the dirt of South Atlanta. Working on the ground, swinging a hammer, I learned what it actually takes to build something real. I am not asking you to trust the man I was. I am asking you to trust the math in front of you and the work I have put into this design." Richard Sterling didn't look convinced. "A pretty speech, Mr. Vega, but leopard spots don't change that quickly. You reached the level of senior architect at Vanguard. That implies a high level of corporate competence that you suddenly abandoned. The inconsistency—" "He didn't abandon his competence, Richard." A voice cut through the room like a steel blade. It was Sarah. Every head turned toward the chairwoman. Marcus looked at his mother, his heart pounding. Was she defending him? Sarah looked directly at Marcus. Her eyes were not filled with maternal warmth. They were filled with the heavy, terrible weight of absolute truth. "He didn't abandon his competence because he never earned that position to begin with," Sarah said, her voice echoing in the silent boardroom. Marcus blinked. "What?" "Let's have full transparency for the board," Sarah said coldly, addressing the room but never breaking eye contact with her son. 5 years ago, Marcus Vega graduated with a good degree but average portfolio work. He applied to Vanguard Architecture and was initially placed in their rejection pile. Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. No, that wasn't true. He had crushed that interview. They called him a prodigy. "The Vega Family Trust," Sarah continued, her words falling like hammer blows, "was negotiating a $50 million commercial lease with Vanguard's parent company at the time. I made a quiet phone call to their managing partner. I made it a stipulation of our contract that Marcus be hired and that he be placed on an accelerated track to senior architect." The boardroom was dead silent. Even Richard Sterling looked uncomfortable. Marcus stood frozen at the podium. The walls of the room seemed to be closing in on him. "His promotions, his high-profile clients, his 6-figure salary," Sarah said ruthlessly, stripping away the very last shred of Marcus's ego in front of the most powerful people in the city. "None of it was earned through his own merit. He was a nepotism hire, shielded from failure, subsidized by my wealth. When I removed the trust's protection 8 months ago, Vanguard let him go because he had no actual value to their firm." Sarah finally leaned forward, her dark eyes piercing straight through his soul. "So the board's question remains valid, Mr. Vega. You have stood before us and spoken beautifully about hard work and building from the ground up. But the truth is, until you drafted this blueprint in a shipping container, you have never built a single thing on your own in your entire life. Why should we fund a fraud?" It was the ultimate kill shot. Twist number 4. Marcus felt a physical pain in his chest, so sharp he thought his ribs might crack. The agony of the revelation was blinding. His entire adult life, every ounce of pride he had ever felt, the arrogance he had weaponized against Maya, the condescension he had rained down on his mother, it was all a complete, manufactured illusion. He was nothing. He had always been nothing. He looked down at his calloused hands. They were shaking. He could defend himself. He could yell. He could storm out. cursing his mother for humiliating him. The old Marcus would have burned the room to the ground. But as Marcus looked at his scarred hands, he remembered the weight of the concrete blocks. He remembered the blistered heat of the sun. He remembered the pride in Dante's eyes when they finished framing a wall together. That was real. The sweat was real. The Haven Project was real. Marcus slowly looked up. He didn't look angry. He looked completely, utterly broken, but standing tall in the wreckage. "You are entirely right, Madam Chairwoman," Marcus said, his voice quiet, devoid of any defense or pride. The board members shifted uncomfortably, surprised by his surrender. "I am a fraud," Marcus continued, the tears he refused to shed making his eyes shine brightly. "Every achievement I claimed as my own was bought and paid for by a woman I treated with unforgivable disrespect. I built my identity on a foundation of sand, and when the wind blew, I collapsed exactly as I was meant to." He reached out and rested his hands on his blueprints. "But these lines are not a fraud. I drew them. I calculated the load-bearing weights with my own mind. I understand the cost of these materials because I have carried them on my own back. I don't deserve this grant. I don't deserve to be in this room. But the families in South Atlanta who are living in squalor deserve a home that won't collapse on them." Marcus stepped back from the podium. He zipped up his leather portfolio, leaving the master blueprints unrolled on the table. "If my past disqualifies me from leading this project, I accept that consequence," Marcus said, bowing his head slightly to the board. "But please keep the designs. Give them to an architect you trust. Build Haven, because regardless of who I am, the work is good, and the people need it." He didn't wait for a dismissal. He didn't look at his mother. Marcus turned his back on the $20 million boardroom and walked out the heavy mahogany doors, leaving his ego, his past, and his masterpiece behind him. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut, severing Marcus from the boardroom, from the millions of dollars, and from the last remaining illusion of his former life. Inside the cavernous room, a thick, stunned silence settled over the oval table. The unrolled blueprints of the Haven Project lay in the center, the only testament to the man who had just walked out. Richard Sterling, the VP of Risk Assessment, cleared his throat, adjusting his silk tie. He looked at the chairwoman, his expression a mixture of awe and profound discomfort. "Madam Chairwoman," Richard began carefully, "that was unprecedented. In my 20 years on this board, I have never seen a project pitched under such, dramatic circumstances. Nor have I seen a candidate voluntarily walk away from a $20 million grant after effectively proving his competence." Sarah Vega remained perfectly still in her high-backed leather chair. Her face, which had been a mask of unforgiving iron just moments ago, softened infinitesimally. Beneath the boardroom table, out of sight from her colleagues, her hands were trembling slightly. The mother in her had wanted to scream, to reach out and hold her son as she systematically dismantled his world. But the leader in her knew the fire had to be allowed to burn the deadwood away. "Marcus Vega is a complicated man, Richard," Sarah said, her voice steady, though it lacked the icy edge from before. "But we are not here to evaluate his psychology. We are here to evaluate his architecture." She stood up, buttoning her charcoal blazer. "As you all know, the bylaws of the Georgia Community Investment Coalition demand absolute impartiality." Sarah addressed the room, making eye contact with each of the 8 board members. "Given the undeniable conflict of interest regarding the architect who drafted these plans, I am formally recusing myself from this evaluation." A murmur rippled through the room. "Sarah, you are the chairwoman," a female board member protested. "This is the largest grant of the fiscal year. We need your insight." "You have my insight," Sarah replied firmly. "You have the blueprints. You have the structural mathematics, the cost analysis, and the social impact projections. You also have the unvarnished truth about the architect's history. I brought him to his knees to show you the man he was, but I will not be the one to lift him up. That decision must be made entirely on the merit of his work." She walked toward the heavy double doors. She paused, looking back at the table. "Vote on the math, Richard. Vote on the families who need those homes. Do not vote for me, and do not vote against him. Make the right choice for the city." With that, Sarah Vega walked out of the boardroom, leaving the fate of her son's redemption in the hands of strangers. Out in the sprawling, marble-floored lobby, Marcus stood perfectly still in front of the elevator bank. He had pressed the down button, watching the digital numbers slowly descend from the penthouse floors. He felt entirely hollowed out, yet for the first time in his adult life, the emptiness didn't terrify him. It felt clean. It felt like a foundation scraped down to the bedrock, finally ready to support something real. "Going down so soon?" The voice was soft, lacking the corporate acoustics of the boardroom. Marcus turned around. Sarah was standing 10 feet away. She wasn't looking at him like a chairwoman anymore. She was looking at him the way she used to look at him when he was a little boy, scraping his knees on the pavement of Auburn Avenue, with a fierce, protective, and unconditional love. Marcus let go of his battered leather portfolio. It hit the marble floor with a soft thud. He closed the distance between them and stopped. He didn't tower over her with the arrogant posture he had used at Thanksgiving. He let his shoulders drop, his head bowing slightly. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered. His voice cracked, the raw emotion finally breaching the dam. "I know you are, baby," Sarah said gently. "Losing everything is a hard pill to swallow." "No." Marcus shook his head, looking up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Not the money, not the penthouse, or the car, or the job. I don't care about any of that." He took a ragged breath, forcing himself to maintain eye contact with the woman he had wronged so deeply. "I am sorry for how I treated you, Mama. I am sorry for being ashamed of the hands that fed me. I was so desperate to prove that I was a king. I didn't care that I was using you as my footstool. You and Dad survived a world that tried to crush you, just so I could have it easy, and I took that privilege and turned it into poison." A single tear slipped down Marcus's weathered cheek. "You were right to take it all away. It was the only way I was ever going to wake up. I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know that the boy you raised isn't entirely gone. I found him again. In the dirt." Sarah closed her eyes, a profound sense of peace washing over her. The bitter winter that had frozen the space between them for years finally broke, giving way to an overwhelming spring. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her son. Marcus let out a choked sob, burying his face in her shoulder, wrapping his strong, calloused arms around her smaller frame. He smelled the familiar scent of her, cocoa butter and peppermint, a scent that grounded him instantly, teleporting him back to a time before ego and greed had corrupted his soul. They stood there in the lobby of the corporate skyscraper, holding each other as the elevator arrived with a soft ding. "I forgave you the moment I walked out of that penthouse on Thanksgiving, Marcus," Sarah whispered into his jacket. "A mother's forgiveness is easy. It was your forgiveness of yourself that we had to fight for. And you fought beautifully today." She pulled back, framing his face with her hands, her thumbs brushing away his tears. "The board is deliberating," she said, her eyes fierce and proud. "I abstained from the vote. I don't know what they will decide about the Haven project, but whatever happens in that room, you walk out of this building as a man, a self-made man." Before Marcus could respond, the heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom swung open. Richard Sterling stepped out into the lobby. He looked at the mother and son, clearing his throat awkwardly to announce his presence. "Mr. Vega?" Richard called out. Marcus gently pulled away from his mother, turning to face the VP. He stood tall, ready to accept the rejection. "The board has concluded its vote," Richard said, walking over to them, a small, genuine smile breaking through his professional facade. The decision was unanimous. Marcus felt his heart stop. "We are funding the Haven project," Richard announced, extending his hand. "The full $20 million. However, there are strict stipulations. You will be the lead architect, but you will not have unmitigated control of the capital. You will report directly to a general contractor appointed by this board, and you will submit to bi-weekly financial audits." Marcus stared at the outstretched hand. He looked at his mother, who simply nodded, a brilliant, glowing smile on her face. Marcus reached out and shook Richard's hand firmly. "I accept your terms, Mr. Sterling. I won't let the coalition down. More importantly, I won't let the families down." "See that you don't," Richard said. "We break ground in 30 days. Go celebrate, Mr. Vega. You've earned it." 1 year later, the Georgia sun beat down warmly on the newly paved asphalt of South Atlanta. Where a sprawling, garbage-filled vacant lot had once stood, a stunning architectural triumph now rose into the blue sky. The Haven community was alive. The modular interlocking buildings featured vibrant brickwork, massive windows that flooded the units with natural light, and wide open-air breezeways that encouraged neighbors to interact. Children were already running through the central green space, their laughter echoing against the sturdy, safe walls. A red ribbon was stretched across the main entrance of the community center. A crowd of over 300 people had gathered. Local politicians, GCIC board members, construction workers, and the families who were holding the keys to their new permanent homes. Marcus Vega stood on the small wooden podium. He wasn't wearing a Tom Ford suit. He wore a simple, clean white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, exposing his muscular, tanned forearms. He wore sturdy denim jeans and a pair of well-oiled work boots. He looked tired, older, but there was a profound, unshakable peace in his eyes. When we started digging the foundation for this project a year ago, Marcus spoke into the microphone, his voice carrying over the quiet crowd. I thought I was building houses, but over the last 12 months, working alongside the incredible men and women of this community, I realized we were building something much more important. We were building a second chance. He looked out into the crowd. He saw Ray standing with his arms crossed over his chest, chewing on a toothpick and nodding approvingly. He saw Dante holding a college textbook under his arm, smiling widely. He didn't see Maya. Their divorce had been finalized quietly 6 months prior. She had moved to Los Angeles to pursue her influencer career. Marcus harbored no ill will toward her. She was a casualty of the toxic environment he had created. Letting her go was part of the penance. Dignity is not a luxury reserved for those who can afford penthouse views, Marcus continued, his voice ringing with conviction. Dignity is a human right. Every family moving into Haven today deserves to feel safe, to feel proud of where they sleep, and to know that their community was built to last. I am incredibly honored to have been a small part of that. The crowd erupted into applause. Marcus smiled, holding up a hand to quiet them down. I didn't do this alone. The structural integrity of this community owes everything to the sweat of the laborers, the vision of the GCIC, and the unwavering discipline of our general contractor, Ray. He turned toward the front row. But the soul of this project, the reason it exists at all, is because of a woman who taught me that true wealth isn't measured by what you can buy, but by what you can build. And more importantly, by what you are willing to lose in order to find yourself. Marcus stepped down from the podium and walked over to the front row. He extended his hand to Sarah Vega. She wore a beautiful, simple floral dress, her silver hair catching the sunlight. She took her son's hand, allowing him to lead her up the short wooden steps to the ribbon. Someone handed Sarah a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors. She looked at Marcus. The arrogant, hollow boy from the penthouse was gone forever. In his place stood a man of substance, a man who knew the value of $1, the weight of a brick, and the sacred nature of a mother's love. Sarah leaned in close to him. Your father would be so incredibly proud of the man standing next to me right now, she whispered. I love you, Mama, Marcus whispered back. Together, they closed the blades of the scissors. The red ribbon snapped in two, fluttering to the ground to the sound of thunderous cheers and the joyful shouts of children claiming their new neighborhood. They say a mother's love is unconditional, and it is. Sarah watched her son walk into the crowd, immediately surrounded by families wanting to shake his hand. He didn't look down on them. He embraced them. He belonged to them. But unconditional love does not mean shielding your children from the consequences of their actions. Sometimes the most profound act of maternal devotion is destruction. Sometimes to save your child's soul, you have to be the one to burn their false kingdom to the ground. People talk about generational wealth as if it is simply a transfer of bank accounts and property deeds. They are wrong. If you hand an unearned empire to a boy who does not understand the struggle, the wealth will eventually destroy the boy. True generational wealth is character. It is resilience. It is the ability to look at a pile of broken rubble and know, without a shadow of a doubt, that you have the strength, the humility, and the calluses to rebuild it with your own 2 hands. I bankrupted my son. I took his money, his car, and his status, and in return, I gave him back his life.